It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcast. The show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards is The Outer Realm, and that's in the category of Best Female Hosted Podcast. The Outer Realm is a popular show hosted by Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano, which has millions of listeners each week. They are well known for their laid-back, roundtable style of interviewing. Together, this dynamic duo brings you the best of the best with guests from around the world who are well-versed within their respective fields of ufology, paranormal, cryptozoology, folklore, and anything else that would be deemed outside the realm of normal. Michelle is an international public figure who has spent the last 2 decades working in the international paranormal community, in research and media. Amelia is a remote viewing medium with 10 years of working with missing children, as well as cold and active murder cases. So go to podcastawards.com to nominate The Outer Realm in the category of Best Female Hosted Podcast. That's podcastawards.com. It's super easy. So just please take a moment and get out and go vote.
Welcome to The Outer Realm with Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday night segment of The Outer Realm, broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. We are fully sponsored by the amazing folks over at Folgers Coffee, who basically have been instrumental in, having us bring you all this fantastic content every single week, every Wednesday and Thursday. So thank you, Folgers. And big thank you to our other sponsor, Dr. Snick, aka the Sonic Surgeon, Justin Snicker, for the contribution of his time, his music, and his voice for our intro and outro. He is an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found at anywhere that good music can be found. So thank you, Justin. So, of course, as always, in the news right now, currently, podcastawards.com. So we've been playing the ads, and we're hoping that you're able to find those of us on the network. But little old us, we will be found under Best Female Hosted Podcast and the Adam Curry category. I believe we're in there as well. So that's kind of a nice surprise. In order to tune into tonight's show, guys, the usual, we are on, let's see, YouTube, UFO Gods and Extraterrestrials, Outer Realm Radio, UFO Paranormal Radio. On Facebook, it's UFO Paranormal Radio Network, United Public Radio. News on the flip side, Canada's Most Haunted, Outer Realm, of course. Joe Montaldo, UFO Undercover. That's where you're going to find us. Let me see. Tonight, you'll notice Bubbles is not with us. So before I get into all the guest info, she's has some family affairs going on that she needs to tend to. So there's a family member who's not doing very well. He's sick. So that's where her attention needs to be, family first, as always. So we're going to wish her and everyone in the family our best wishes, send love and light, and hopes for a speedy recovery. Now, tonight, I am so pleased to welcome back the return of a really dear friend, Dacre Stoker, who's a great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker. Known him for a few years, and he's just really delightful and so knowledgeable. So any Dracula fan, to which I have been from like real early on, like probably even preteen. So I think it's when I read Dracula as the first full book I ever read. So anybody who's a Dracula fan's got to know Dacre and all of his writings as well. He's an international best-selling co-author of Dracula the Un-Dead, official Stoker family endorsed sequel to Dracula. Dacre's also co-editor with Elizabeth Miller of the Lost Journals of Bram Stoker, The Dublin Years. Dracul, which I have read, which he co-authored with J.D. Barker. It was the UK's #1 best-selling hardcover novel in horror and supernatural in 2018, and a top 5 finalist, by the Horror Writers Association for the Bram Stoker Award for superior achievement in a novel. He does have the film rights for Dracul, and they have been optioned by Paramount Studios. He's a native of Montreal, Canada. Yeah, Dacre. He actually taught phys ed and sciences for 22 years, if you can get over that, 22 years, in both Canada and the U.S. He's participated in the sport of modern pentathlon. Hopefully I said that right, because I'm not reading it clearly. As an athlete and a coach of the international and Olympic levels for Canada for 12 years. He's an avid player and coach of the unique game of real tennis. So in May of 2016, an athlete he had been coaching for the past 4 years, Camden Riviere, won the World Championships of Court Tennis. Dacre lives with his wife, Jenne, 2 dogs and cat in Aiken, South Carolina. And he does have quite a few books. And I'm trying to see if we're going to have a banner up. I don't know how much of it you guys are actually going to be able to see. But let me see if I can scroll down here to where everything is. Books include Dracul, The Lost Journal of Bram Stoker, Dracula the Un-Dead, and Slane's Castle Secret History by Wild Wolf Publishing. So lots of really amazing stuff here. You guys will see that the websites are on the banner. And if you have any questions, get ready to chime in, because he is definitely going to be a hoot to listen to. Very versed and very gracious with his time. So chiming into the chat room, hey, Wayne, Tamara, thank you for voting, Tamara. Yes, podcastawards.com, guys. Go find us. We only have a couple more weeks, if that. I think we only have to the end of the month. So I know, please. Hey, Michael. Yes, he is a very cool guest. He's really, really awesome. You guys are going to love him. He's actually been on the show before, almost like the early years of the Outer Realm, when we were actually in a studio. Yep, we were in a studio once. And he's probably been on 2 or 3 times, actually. But of course, hold on.
Hi there.
Hello, how are you?
Hey, good, Michelle. How are you?
I'm good. Amelia can't join us tonight. She's got a sick family member, so she's tending.
Oh, no, that's too bad.
It is. Yeah, it is. Seem to be hearing a lot of that lately. It just seems to be the times, I think.
Yeah,
but so
sure.
It's just you and me, kid.
It's all right. We could do it.
We can do it indeed. So been really excited to have you back on. It's been ages back since, the studio audio days. And I know. But, prior to our, 2 to 3 million listeners, hopefully just be awesome for you. So what have you been up to? I know you're up to tons of things. We used to talk about all this stuff you had coming up. And then, of course, the pandemic came, and then all of a sudden we were free again.
It slowed things down, obviously. Not as many public appearances, but, got a lot of work done, staying close to home. But
yes.
Boy, it's been nice to get back out again. And I it's really strange, Michelle. You and I talk about the other world, the paranormal, all this. I feel that's what we've been in. I don't even remember freaking dates. I don't know what it's like. It's like this time warp that happened, and a lot of things got done. A lot of people got sick. I got all my shots, but I still got COVID at least once, and probably I think another time as well. It wasn't a bad one, but it's nice. It's nice to be here. I just literally got back on Friday from Montana and British Columbia.
I know you're
having some with
fun
fishing.
out there.
I mean, all fishing, no Dracula.
You dare to relax? They let you?
Yeah, I had to put my foot down to myself and say, okay, this is the time to go and chill and just recharge and have some fun, which I did. It was great fun. A friend of mine from Nashville, Tennessee, that I usually see once a year, and it's when we take a fishing trip together.
I love it. I love it. I'm glad you were able to do it, because I don't imagine, you were able to do that with all the travel restrictions, here
No.
in Canada, especially.
Yeah. Well, it was, as you know, there was a problem, and rightfully so, with people crossing
Sure.
borders. So
Oh,
when we
yes.
went the last time, even last year, we couldn't get into Canada. So it's just, okay, this is going to be a Montana trip. But we happen to have a friend who's a guide whose parents have two homes, one in Fernie, BC, and the other in
Right.
Kalispell. And so he's dual citizen. So he pops back and forth. And this time we could pop back and forth, which was
Right.
nice.
Yeah, they just opened everything up,
Yeah,
which is
yeah, it
great.
was good.
I know we see it all here in the falls. It's like, tourists are back.
I know.
So, we got the buses pulling up in front of the house. It's like, yes, yes. it's on some tour. We're like, who knew?
Coming to
Except
check
for all
out
the 50
you.
people pouring out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
anyway, what I'd like to do, just because it's been a while and we have so many more listeners now, and of course we're up for another podcast award that we're nominated for this year, out of Los Angeles, which we were really humbled. Made it to the finals last year. We're like, what, really? It's like, wow.
Nice. Yeah.
So it just brings in a lot of extra listeners right now who just want to check out the show. So I'd like to sort of start from square one, just briefly.
Sure.
I'll let you take it where you want to go. It's pretty laid back, right? And I know we've already getting questions coming in here, which I know you're going to talk about. Can the guest talk about his obsession with Vlad the Impaler and what lengths his family investigated him? That's the whole Bram Stoker story for the most part. So I will let you take it away.
Well, yeah, let's make sure that we don't forget that one, Michelle, because that's really important. And I put that one in the category of some of the most important research that I've done, because I actually have some stuff that is fairly new and recent about what Bram Stoker knew about his, about Vlad the Impaler. And as you know, because you and I are going to do this someday with some of your listeners, we're going to go to Transylvania. I take tours there. I work with a company called experiencetransylvania.com.
Yes.
Wonderful folks. They actually helped me organize this recent trip in May to Whitby and Edinburgh, Cruden Bay. But sadly, because of the war in Ukraine and Transylvania being on the border and a lot of refugees coming in, especially one of the places that Michelle and I are going to visit is actually a stone's throw, and I mean literally a stone's throw to the Moldavian border. When we get up on this mountain, and we'll talk about this later in the show, it's a little bit too close to a hot zone or uncertainty zone.
Yeah,
so,
different times.
Yeah, we'll get. I'm speaking to that person that asked. I'm speaking of this, having been to Transylvania 12 times, done a lot of research. But
I've been one, and it's just 11 too little.
let's roll it back and just kind of go where it started. So Bram Stoker was one of 7 children. I am the great grandson of his youngest brother, George. So that's how I'm connected. Of those 7 children in that family, his father was named Abraham. That's how Bram was named, Abraham. He shortened it to Bram. And then his mother was Charlotte. Of those 7 children, only 3 had offspring. And of those 3, only 2 of them have active living lines.
Wow.
Now, obviously, one of them is his youngest brother, George, because I wouldn't be here in person. So, yeah, there's sort of, 12 or some of us in that line. And then Bram had a son, Noel. That son had a daughter, Anne. Anne was married twice because both her husbands died in and around World War II. Wow. Of those marriages, there were 3 great-grandsons. 2 of them are alive today. And of course, they've got children and grandchildren. The other one, Tom, had a younger brother of Bram. Bram was number 3 in the order of 7, had a daughter. That daughter was married, and they had a son, but that line has no longer continued. So what's sort of interesting is when people say, if you look at legacy of family, it goes back and there's going to be so many people, it's all watered down, nobody knows anything. And in this case, it's not true. Luckily, his great-grandsons have retained some of the, boxes of books, some letters, cool things within
Which is
the
amazing.
family. It is amazing, and
That stuff always gets lost.
it does. And luckily, they had the foresight over the years to donate some things, sell some things to libraries, to archives, so that they're there for all of us, not just fellow family members to look at. But you never know when someone's going to have a fire or a leak or something in the basement, or something's going to happen, and stuff could be lost. Or actually, the one great-grandson that's no longer living had some things in his boat that sunk and lost some pieces. He was really into yachting, as a lot of the family were.
Right.
And he sort of lived in I think in the Caribbean somewhere for a while, and his boat went down with some of the family, some books and stuff, which is sad. But
Right.
for the most part, a lot of things are available. Saying that, though, my research, which has been quite serious for about 15 years, really is thwarted in a way because Bram Stoker was such a humble man, and he didn't write that much about himself.
Right.
Obviously, if your listeners that don't know, his primary job after he left Dublin as a civil servant, he was a clerk in the Petty Sessions legal department. That's kind of his legal side. He had a degree in mathematics. That's that kind of number crunching side. He got a great job and moved to London to work for Henry Irving, who became the most famous Shakespearean actor of all time. He was the first actor to actually own
What a great
theater.
connection, though.
It was everything Bram needed. It was that creative side of his soul, of his brain, that was able to flourish, while three of his brothers, my great-grandfather being one, were all sort of scientists, doctors. Two were civil servants. The two sisters were artists. So Bram was the one who didn't quite follow the family mold, yet he was the one to call to duty as son number 3. When father retired, Bram took a job that father helped carve out for him as a clerk in the Petty Sessions legal department, which meant that creative side of Bram's brain, that writing side, that poet side, that guy that loved to draw, that got awards as a young boy, that was a founding member of the Dublin Painting and Sketching Club, that side was kind of squashed while he had to deal with the minutia of, all these little laws, anything other than murder, all the exciting stuff, he had to deal with and make sure all the clerks did all their jobs right. He found, incidentally, when he became the inspector of all the clerks in the whole country, that everything was in disarray. And typical Bram Stoker, and this really kind of comes back to show his character at that time in his life and later on as well, he decided to write a book about it, Michelle, and actually create a manual on his own. This was not something that his boss said, this is part of your job description.
Right.
He did this on his own dime, and it is technically his first book, called The Duties of Clerks of Petty Sessions. And get this, it was in use in the Irish legal system until the early 1960s.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and so he got everybody organized and made it all. And this is the type of thing that Henry Irving needed Bram Stoker to do. He needed Bram to help him organize and run a theater, run the books, make sure all the actors and actresses had the right contracts, all the legalities were taken care of, the publicity, soup to nuts. Bram Stoker did it all for 27 years. His writing was on the side. And I get back to where I started saying, there's not much time for Bram Stoker to write much about himself. So when I started my research, it is bits and pieces and snippets of things that I have been traveling around the world. I have been meeting people at different conferences, online and in person, finding out and getting it into these scholars' brains about what did Bram Stoker actually know about Vlad the Impaler? What did he know about spiritualism? What was his interest in mesmerism? When we find these letters about the occult, what did that really mean? Because Bram never came out and said, well, I wrote this book, like they would today. Somebody like you would have a podcast with Bram Stoker and say, well, what were your thoughts on this? Where'd you get this information from? That doesn't exist. So we've got to put that together in a way that I kind of call myself a forensic literary detective by
Right,
putting all
pretty
these little
much.
bits and pieces together. Yeah.
Oh yes, pretty much. It's you look at all the little fine details. I don't think people realized just how much was put in there because he never actually went to Transylvania,
That's right. Good call. Yep.
right? And I mean, you look at how it's pretty accurate considering the guy's never been there. When you read the book, you could put yourself there. So it's to think that all of this came from this amazing mind and put to paper. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and further to his personal characteristics, if I may,
Yes, of course.
like I said, his writing a book about the duties of clerks of petty sessions.
Yes.
We now know, and I think, and correct me, Michelle, if I explained this the last time I was on your show, but it was discovered fairly recently in the London Library. Did we talk about this, about the books that were there? That
we may have touched on them. Yeah, but it's okay. There's so many more people listening. Our numbers are considerably higher now. So a lot of new people. Go crazy.
I'll go into detail and
Yes.
Because it's really fascinating. Up until about 3 years ago, we had the Dracula notes, which is 124 pages that live in Philadelphia in the Rosenbach Museum. Those were Bram's source notes. And those source notes were pretty complete as far as what books he looked at to do his research. It's funny. It's almost like he was writing a paper for university where he puts down his source books. He kept track of those. He also had 2 or 3 different iterations of how a book should be. He had day timers because as you said earlier, just a few moments ago, he made it sound like the story was so real. So he actually kept a day timer to have the dates right, the sequences right, the distances between locations, because there was so much travel by carriage, by train, by boat, different countries. He had to get that all right so people kind of got the feel that this was right on. So we get that from his notes. There's also the typescript, which is the manuscript that has been typed, therefore it's called a typescript, that Paul Allen, the gentleman that was the co-founder of Microsoft and owned a football team and basketball team, I think, out in California. He was a great patron of the Museum of Popular Culture, actually it's Seattle, Washington, where he was. And he allowed myself and J.D. Barker to come and take a look at this Dracula typescript when we were doing our research for Dracul. Wow. We wanted to know exactly what was in the typescript and, most importantly, what may have been edited out of it. So we found that out by going up to Paul Allen's estate and looking at this stuff and analyzing it. So that's really the number 2 really important piece of information. Number 3, Michelle, is there was actually one interview that Bram Stoker gave to a journalist called Jane Stothart in the British Weekly newspaper a couple of months after Dracula came out.
Lucky guy.
and that's the only interview that anybody has ever found that Bram is talking about things he discovered and why he wrote the novel Dracula. So those are the kind of the cornerstones until this discovery in the London Library popped up. And it was done in a really interesting and kind of behind the scenes way. The fellow, his name is Philip Spedding. He's no longer working there, but he was the head of fundraising for it's a private library, the London Library, which actually was, back in Bram's day, all those books were owned by the British Museum Library, and they all got transferred over after a fire into what's called the London Library, which is private. Philip Spedding was a Dracula fan, and he had picked up a book that had published Robert Basang and Elizabeth Miller from Toronto. He's from Vancouver, and they're both deceased actually since this dark pandemic. So their memory lives on in their incredible work that they've done. They published the Dracula notes and all the annotations with it. Philip had a copy of that book and was leafing through the book and was reading the names of the book in the back that Bram listed and thought, Well, I know that Bram Stoker was a member here. We don't have in our records, because they were destroyed by fire or bombing or a little bit of both in World War II, the names of the books that each of the members checked out. Those are long gone, and they don't have those little sleeves in them that you and I would remember as kids growing up, where you take a little card out and they stamp the date and put your name on it, right? They didn't have those.
No.
So what he did was he just walked through the aisles with his cart, thought, well, I'll just start looking for these books. And over the course of 2 days, he found 28 of these books that were still in general circulation. So not only that, though, he stacked them up, went to his office, opened up the books and started leafing through them. And sure enough, he started finding strange little notes in pencil, markings, almost like hieroglyphics.
Right.
And what he studied was Victorian era shorthand to figure out what this stuff meant.
Wow,
and he got a hold of my friend Robert 18 Basang, who at this time he and I were working on an annotated Dracula. And he knew this because he was a friend of Philip's as well. And he said, guys, I need some help. Would you guys have any source books that Bram Stoker owned, that maybe his family still has, that has any of these weird marks in the margins? Because if they do, I want to compare them to the ones that I've just found in my library that I think Bram Stoker checked out. And if they are consistent, this is going to show us that Bram actually marked in our margins, and these books were used to write Dracula. So I'll never forget this. When these photographs were sent to me, it was just like me finding the Bram Stoker's lost journal. It was like, oh my gosh, this is in front of me. And I'm able to make a very significant announcement to this fellow who started looking at this, that I believe beyond a reasonable doubt that these marks were made by Bram. And the reason I was able to do that, it's all this kind of fate, is Bram Stoker's great-grandson, my cousin, has loaned me this copy of Dracula that has it's a first edition, but sixth printing of Dracula. It had on the front, written in Bram's handwriting, 1901 abridged edition. So what Bram had done was taken a first edition that his publisher had handed him and said, go ahead and reduce the word count by 30,000 words, hand it back to me. We're going to create the first abridged edition in 1901. So I don't know how long he had to do this, but this was the book that he made very similar marks in the margins to either get rid of words, add words. So I had in my hand these books, that the pictures of one and the real thing, going, look at this. These are the same symbols that Bram uses. Gapping, words to fix gaps, take out words, adding things. So when I told these two guys, Robert Basang and BC and Philip, it was like, you guys have to come over to London as soon as possible. Get on a plane, come on over, and help me look at all these other ones. This is a major find.
Right.
And it turned out to be so, Michelle, and I'll sort of now fast forward a little bit, because newspaper article was written. And when I got there, the headline was, Dracula author was a sucker for defacing books.
Wow. That's nice. I love it. It showed he was human.
Yeah, exactly.
We all do things like that,
Yeah, but I mean, does it have to make front page news, in the London newspaper?
I know.
And I was a little embarrassed, because I thought, oh, geez, if there's a fine attached to this, I'm going to have to hand it over to his great grandsons. I'm not covering that one.
Cons. You're going to get the bill.
Yeah, but Philip said to me, it's kind of straight-laced. He says, Dacre, don't worry about a thing. Our greatest reward is that we're now able to say that the London Library was, ground zero, the genesis for Bram Stoker's research, for his writing of Dracula.
Yes.
So now Dacre has to get a little sneaky here, because Michelle, imagine this: if in your world of paranormal adventures and things you go on, if you found something this cool, what are you going to do? You've got to get some record yourself. So immediately I said, well, Philip, can I take a couple of photos of this with my iPhone? It's for my own research. Absolutely, go ahead. So I pulled out the iPhone and I spent the next 2 hours taking pictures of what I thought was the most interesting pages of the table of contents, what he underlined, what he checked off. And that has been, as I said at the top of your show, 3 cornerstones. This is now the 4th cornerstone in my lecture series that I give around the world, the writings that I've been doing, and the annotations of Dracula that I do, to be able to say that, as you said at the top of the show, in Bram's head, there was a lot of imagination going in his head based on things that happened earlier in his life. This very difficult childhood disease that he overcame, possible bloodletting, his mother's stories of children and people being misdiagnosed and being buried prematurely during the cholera epidemic, all this horrible stuff that gave him a very dark sense of imagination. But the side of Bram that was a research sort of, maniac, he just had to get everything right and he had to dig and dig and dig. Luckily, he had the British Library, maps and books, and get this, books by adventurers that came before him that did go to Transylvania and make very detailed maps, very detailed descriptions of what the people in Transylvania look like, their customs, how the gypsies operated, the dialects of different people in Whitby, England, as well as how they spoke in Holland and different places to get obviously Van Helsing right. The other thing that it had in these books, and this is where your expertise, where you and I, Michelle, can put our heads together for a few moments, is it was very apparent when the dates of these books and the topics of the books and who was writing them, that the Victorians were obsessed with spiritualism, mesmerism, the occult, and that there were books written by learned men, not what you and I would call kind of fly-by-night whack jobs that have a great idea. But this was a priest of Church of England. This was a very well-respected medical doctor. They're writing about vampirism, about somnambulism, about trance sleep, about mesmerism. They're referring to Dr. Joseph Mesmer and phrenology, these different fringe sciences. So Bram tapped into things that were on the consciousness and the interest of people at the end of this century, where a lot of change was happening. Religion was beginning to sort of be looked at by more skeptical eyes. Science was being introduced in a way to figure out things using scientific process. But at the same time, people were going beyond that and say, look, as Bram does in Dracula, science can't answer everything.
True.
There are other things out here. And the quote that just sums it up is in Dracula: there are mysteries which men can only guess at, which age by age they may solve only in part. So I'm going to pause because I've been on a ramble, Michelle. And
I like you rambling.
And I know you're not nodding your head because
I dig it completely.
You and I can get into this and kind of, with your knowledge of the paranormal, and that's what these guys were doing back in the day in the late 1800s. Remember, this book was written between 1890, it was published in 1897. Bram was a Freemason. Order of the Golden Dawn was beginning to emerge. There's all these things that were in back rooms that people were sort of afraid to be seen out in public doing and thinking about and discussing with other learned men, that really opened up the consciousness of people. They were dying to know things. And just because the scientific process was getting great credibility, it could maybe not explain everything. And Bram Stoker was an open-minded man that said, in his way, let's consider this. This could be something that is something we need to be aware of, even though we can't prove it in a physical sense.
I agree.
That's Uncle Bram, and that's the story of Dracula, and that's how he came to learn a lot of this stuff.
Well, he was made privy just as a Mason to a lot of information that, the common man would not be made privy to. And of course, out in, Europe and the United Kingdom, you guys were way ahead of the whole spiritualist movement before it even came here to North America. But you here in North America, it hit to the point where you have the Fox sisters, who were at the heart of the whole spiritualist movement. Lilydale, New York, which is the largest spiritualist community, they say, in the world. Abraham Lincoln used to frequent it. Harry Houdini did everything in his power to debunk it. Then the Victorians, this way they specialized in table tipping and spirit communication and, speaking to the dead. But the Victorians used to love picnicking in cemeteries. They used to even have these obscure greeting cards or Christmas cards. And, they loved telling ghost stories at Christmas. Like, they were very obsessed with all of that. So, getting into the occult side of it, I don't know how many from this side of the world would have gone as deep, let's say, because it's fairly new here as it was fading out in the UK or Europe.
Okay. Well, one of the things, so let's talk about it, sort of an American that jumped back and forth.
Sure.
Mark Twain, Sam
Of course.
Clemens,
Yes.
was a neighbor of Bram Stoker's,
Right.
was a good friend of Bram Stoker's. I've
love
seen
it.
many letters back and forth.
Mhm.
Twain had a difficult life. He lost a child, lost his wife. He had ups and downs himself. And during that time, he made money, he lost money, but he had very open-minded guy himself. Bram Stoker and Henry Irving actually invested in one of the schemes that Mark Twain was trying to do, which was with the Page Compositor, which was a printer. And actually one of them exists in the Hartford house, Hartford, Connecticut. But apparently this thing never worked. It was too complicated. And all the investors initially lost their money.
Mhm.
But I've seen the letters that Mark Twain sent to Bram and said, I'm going to do my best to get your money back. And he did. He got some American backers to actually pay. And at the time, $25 from Bram Stoker and $50 from Henry Irving doesn't sound like a lot of money, but you
But
kind
it
of
was back then.
It was back then.
It was.
It really was. And they did get their money back. So it shows the
Right.
character of Mark Twain and his ability to
Mhm.
tap into people back in the States with money to back him.
Well, Mark
But
Twain stayed in a place called Jamestown, which was very close with a friend who's very close to Lilydale. I mean, very close to Lilydale. So maybe he somehow was a part of that movement.
well,
And
I'm going to tell you something that will probably corroborate with that.
okay.
There we go. Friends with Tesla. I didn't know that. Maybe we can get more info. Here is something that Bram Stoker, a really tight connection with Bram and Dracula and Mark Twain. Bram was pretty well-rounded guy, connected with publishers in the U.S. in England. He helped Mark Twain get a book published. So he acted as his agent to get a book published. So he got to know Mark Twain and his writing very well. He quoted in Dracula, I once knew an American who said, faith is believing in things you know to be untrue. And think about that for a moment. Faith is believing in things you know to be untrue. This is in the novel where Van Helsing is trying to explain to the scientist, Dr. Seward, with the others around them, about science proving things and having an open mind about superstition and other things you can't prove. And he says, I want you to believe. And Seward says, believe in what? You need to believe in things you know that are not true. I once heard of an American who said this. Well, it just so happens that Mark Twain's book called Pudd'nhead Wilson Round About the Equator, he has that wonderful quote that is almost identical to that. and it is something to the effect of, you have to understand things you know that ain't so.
Right.
faith is believing things you know to be ain't so. So it's
Right.
almost like Bram gave a tip of a hat to his good friend down the street,
Right.
who these guys probably sat around and had tea or whatever, some of the
Oh, I
libation,
think
and
so.
chatted about this stuff.
I
And
think
that's
so.
why I think he slid that into Dracula, as he did Charles Darwin. You know, Bram put vampire bats that he got out of a New York newspaper that Charles Darwin was quoted as finding these in Chile, and he actually used that coming out of Quincy Morris's mouth, where again we're talking, Van Helsing is talking about the vampire and the blood sucking, and Morris says, yes, when I was in South America, this vampire bat came out of the trees and drank so much
So he
blood
paid
from my
homage
horse.
to his compadres
He
by
did.
including them in the book in
That's
one
right.
form or another. I think that's fantastic.
Exactly. So I think that leads to what you were saying, Michelle, about Mark Twain, you know, being quite serious about spiritualism, and so Bram tapped into that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think so. I mean, he lives so close to Lilydale. People come from all over the world, even today, and it's been established since the 1800s. Even today, they come from around the world to come to this place, just to feel like the energy. And they've got the museums and the houses, or it's just like stepping back in time. And they'll
Wow.
dress in period clothing and do seances, and they can do table tipping, or they'll get table walking, and it's quite a spectacle. That's still, the interest is still there, but it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't go. I don't think people look at spiritualism in Victorian times and think about, at least on this side of the world, they don't go back and think back into the occult and the esoteric, and like they don't go that far back. They don't realize that there's so much more to it.
Well, let's talk about another, probably the biggest star from England, or in this case Scotland,
Yes.
at that time, and that's Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yes. Yes.
Arthur Conan Doyle was another good friend of Bram Stoker's.
Right.
And Bram Stoker helped get a story of Conan Doyle's produced as a play at the Lyceum Theatre.
Wow,
So there
very
was
nice.
there was that business connection, but Bram Stoker also did one of his side gigs was writing for newspapers. He did a very extensive interview with Arthur Conan Doyle prior to him getting married, and these guys became quite close. You can Google, and to your listeners, highly recommend Google Bram Stoker interview with Arthur Conan Doyle. There's also a wonderful website all about Conan Doyle. You'll also find in there one of the very few letters that has anything to do with Dracula. In this case, it's the letter from Arthur Conan Doyle congratulating Bram on the novel Dracula.
Wow.
And what I find is interesting, and if you and I kind of put our little occult hat on for a moment, he actually says, there's a sentence that says in there, it's the best story of diablerie I have read for a long time. The old man and the ladies are wonderful. The professor is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But he mentions diablerie, which heightens. It got my attention, Michelle, when I started, because what I do is, as again, literary forensic detective, I have this, erasable, and I set up my office from time to time when I'm on this sort of hunt for things, and I've got Conan Doyle circled diablerie. I then have a little line over to Henry Irving playing the role of Mephistopheles in the play Faust, which was one of his most famous and successful plays at the Lyceum Theatre for many, many years. Of course, for your listeners, if you don't know, this is the devil. This is Henry Irving personified in Bram's face for a long, many, 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 many shows. You've got this devil right here.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go back to these books that I've just mentioned in the London Library. And they're not, as I said, these are books by learned men and respected men, a medical doctor, a priest, that are talking about the devil and where his his influences, the power of the devil. And in 3 of these books that had check marks and underlining, one of them had volcanoes are known to be the home to evil subterranean gods, and went on to blah 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 about that. So that's a check mark. Then it goes on to say that the devil finds his place in high mountains, in lofty forests, all these kind of distressed lands where he can go, where the powers of Christianity are unchecked. So again, this makes my diagram. He's got volcanoes, he's got high mountains, he's got these different places that the devil could hang out. And Bram's own Bible that he was given at 11 years of age, his great-grandson still have. I got to leaf through every single page. There are 3 things, and only 3 things, that are underlined in pencil, much like the London Library books. I don't know if he did it at the age of 11, Michelle. I don't know what age he did it in, but I do know that he was given this at 11. But what is underlined is have faith in God, resist the power of the devil.
Wow.
Underlined. So Bram obviously was keyed to this, and it makes total sense. And we're getting back to that person that asked the question about Vlad the Impaler about 30 minutes ago.
There we go, Michael.
Here we go to Michael Kennedy.
Talk about his obsession with Vlad the Impaler and what lengths his family investigated him.
Well, here we go, Michael and others.
This is for you, Michael.
in these 2 books, one by William Wilkinson, called The Account of Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. These are provinces in Romania, right next to Transylvania, right next door. And this other one by James Samuelson called Transylvania, Its Products, and Transylvania Then and Now. So we found out that 2 libraries, not just one, 2 libraries that Bram visited where he actually signed out the book, one in Whitby, this is in Yorkshire, had the Wilkinson book, and then back at the London Library, the Wilkinson book and the Samuelson book. And both of these books mentioned Dracula, meaning the devil, and going into the history of Vlad Dracula III. So I can say with, beyond a reasonable doubt, as if we're sitting in a court of law, that what caught Bram's attention, because not only did the book say it, but he copied it down and put it into his notes, that Dracula means devil. Now, we also know later on, but Wilkinson didn't know and he wrote it, but it also means dragon. But that's almost immaterial. That is, what was Bram Stoker looking at the time? It was the connection between the nickname Vlad Dracula and devil. The Samuelson book went into much greater detail, and this is important for Michael, about what kind of a person and what was going on during the time Vlad Dracula III reigned in the late 1400s, early 1500s, fighting the Ottomans.
That's right.
Impaling people, being really brutal to his own subjects if they disobeyed him. When visiting envoys came over from the Sultan Mehmet from Ottoman Empire, they wouldn't take their turbans off, so he had them nailed into their head. All of these things that painted the right picture for Bram Stoker to borrow and create a backstory for his fictional Count Dracula.
Right.
So now the picture is fairly complete, and let me sort of finish it for you.
Yes.
Wallachia is right next door to Transylvania. Bram Stoker took a prince from Wallachia known as Prince Vlad Dracula. His nickname was the Impaler by his enemies. He didn't call himself that.
Even though they're the ones who taught him.
That exactly. That's exactly right. When he was held hostage there for
all
many
Europe,
years.
yeah, but all Europe was impaling.
Oh, everyone was. But,
It was the thing to do
the
back
fashionable
then.
thing to do. So Bram needed. I'm convinced that he needed. And again, top of the show, you said he made the story feel real. He needed a real person with a real backstory to associate with what was real superstitions at the time. So he merged the vampire panic from from those same Middle Ages, and those merged with the real guy's backstory. So that's Vlad Dracula wasn't a blood drinker. He may have been bloodthirsty and did all kinds of horrible things to make blood come out of all these different places in people's bodies. But he inadvertently created sort of a modern day Hollywood icon out of a guy who really was a hero, even though he was bloodthirsty. He was successful in only 3.5 years of holding back the Ottoman Empire, this teeny little country, or actually, no, in that case, a little province, because he had a very difficult time unifying.
It was a tough job.
It was very tough. And everybody was, like fighting each other to gain power. And then they also had this huge, very powerful Ottoman Empire that was surrounding them, moving into Christian Europe. And half the guys were like, well, look, if we just pay our tribute to the Sultan, he won't squash us. So we'll go and betray Vlad Dracula, who is trying to fight off the Ottomans. We'll just make peace with them. So truthfully, though, from the readings I've done, Vlad Dracula did the same thing, and so did his father from time to time. Sometimes they were fighting the Ottomans, sometimes they were fighting the Austrian-Hungarians, sometimes they were paying both off to stay peacefully in the middle. Very difficult times, very barbaric times.
Absolutely.
But those are the facts as best as I could put the pieces together of.
That was the nature of the beast then, Yeah.
And that nature of the beast is actually discussed in the novel when Bram has Dracula himself say, the blood of Attila is in these veins, and I've done this and I've done this. It gives him an interesting backstory. What it doesn't do, and I think that's what's so cool about it, but many more movies have done this, is actually say how exactly he became a vampire. What we get is a slight hint that he attended something called the Show-Laments, which, according to Emily Gerard, which again is a Scottish lady, one of Bram's sources in her book, Land Beyond the Forest, she was living in northern Transylvania, married to a cavalry officer in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire cavalry. She wrote all about the Show-Laments and about Strigoi, Nosferatu, how people became vampires, all this stuff. So he learned about Transylvanian superstitions from a Scottish lady who told him all about the school of the dark arts. And that name is mentioned twice in Dracula when Van Helsing says, yes, he was trained in the school of in the Show-Laments. So that's it. But as you and I know, Michelle, lots of movies, one of them being Dracula Untold, go into great detail about the conversion of Vlad the Impaler into a vampire. You can't blame the Stokers for that. Bram just did a hint on that one.
They just did a good job. I have to tell you, though, I have actually read, and you can only believe half of what you read, of course. I try to cross-reference the heck out of everything. And I had put these on the back burner. It's probably in the other computer. But when we talk a little bit about spiritualism and Vlad himself, that he was considered to be an ascended master, and he was also considered to be a Templar.
Ah, cool. Okay.
No, I thought, what? I've never heard this. What is this heresy? Like, this is crazy. I mean, I could see him. He's intelligent. He was a war strategist. He was a smart man. And, but when you think about it, like the Order of the Dragon, if you really delve deep, the dragon, I mean, there's so much literature out there where the dragon is associated with the holy bloodline, the whole, like this. It gets crazy if you really delve into it. And I thought, this is really a different twist on things. Order of the Dragon not being looked at as, let's say, from a dark devil standpoint, but as a noble line family of Templars who did their part from, like Wallachia, Transylvania, Romania.
No,
It's just
you're right.
they came from everywhere.
So your listeners get this right. The King Sigismund of Luxembourg, even though it's a teeny country, was very powerful at the time. He started this Order of the Dragon, and I don't know what date, if it's early 1400s, somewhere around there,
right?
Because he recognized the need to unify the leaders of Europe as the Ottoman Empire was getting big and powerful, developing gunpowder, and the only thing hanging them back was the difficulty in getting around the Black Sea and through this, what is called the European Everglades. It's the Danube Delta. It's very difficult to get their heavy cannons. So that plus the Carpathian Alps, the mountains that provided not just Vlad Dracula, but all the sort of the guys who were fighting off the Hunyadi family, the Austrian-Hungarian guys that could use the mountain passes to their advantage, even though they were vastly outnumbered. They could be, starting landslides and, shooting down arrows and spears and things when these
like
massive
guerrilla
long
warfare.
lines. Oh, he was totally guerrilla, and that's the only thing they could really do. Yeah,
exactly. I just love the different theories, though. People go off into all these different research directions, and I'm always curious to see. Like, those are two new ones. I kind of went, that's really interesting. But it's, I like seeing where people are going to go with it, because you just don't know. For every little grain of something that they can find, it's just another piece to the story.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. So it's. I think it's pretty cool that.
Oh yes.
Bram wanted to make sure that this story created what is called a willful suspension of disbelief, that had no places, as you said, even though he didn't go there.
Yes, fascinating.
He had a lot of knowledge of train travel. We know he had been as far as Italy, because he actually sadly had to go and bury his father when his father and mother went to the mainland, to Switzerland. They lived in France. When they retired, they wanted to take the two daughters so they could be trained properly in the arts. They went for a while in Naples, and that's where their father died. So Bram, being the dutiful son and had all the legal background, he went there to help make the affairs, and they actually buried him in Naples. But we don't know if he went any farther. We know he's also been to parts of Germany, because obviously with the Lyceum Theater troupe, they went to different places. So it's been interesting for me to sort of look at stories other than Dracula that Bram wrote.
Yes.
How much were they influenced by his visiting to other places? And what resources did he use? And of course, that keeps coming back to Dracula. The Baedeker Guide is one of the books he lists. Of course, I get, my wife thinks I'm crazy at times, but I go on to A Books, and I buy the same edition of books that are sitting in the London Library as Bram had, because I want to be able to see these books when I'm sitting in my research.
See what he saw. Not edited versions, right?
Exactly. And other than where the check marks were, obviously he read more than that.
Yes.
So what is one of the coolest things, Michelle, and this is getting back to a little bit of a plug. So when you and I and some of your listeners, if we can go soon to Northern Transylvania, the very same map that was in one of the books by Charles Bonner that Bram used to plot out Dracula. I bought the book, and not the same book he had in his hand, but the same edition, and have that map. And what's so cool is you can look at that map and see, okay, this is where he came across on the train. You can see the train line from Budapest to Oreda to Klaustenberg up to Bistrica. In Bistrica, he spends the night, takes the carriage. Oh my gosh, look at this, the Borgo Pass. Bram didn't make that up. it's on the map, and you can
Right.
see the roads and the mountains. And then it's like, oh my gosh, look at this. So this other sort of revelation came to me with the help of a Dutch German guy who was just as obsessed, maybe more so than I am. He looked at Bram's notes in the book that Miller and Bissang wrote. I looked at it in the library where they live, and I of course purchased one of these books as well. It has the map coordinates for something. Okay, it's got these map coordinates, and then it's got these names of things in pencil. And when Hans looked at these things, Hans de Roost, and said, and he Skyped me, this is before Zoom. He said, Dacre, I think I found this interesting stuff. I think this is leading to the Castle Dracula. He said, but it's inverted. I said, what do you mean it's inverted? He says, well, when I go to 22 north latitude and 25 3/4 longitude, it puts the intersect point in the Saudi Arabian desert. I said, that can't be. I said, well, of course it can't be, because this is supposed to be near the Borgo Pass. So he started looking at the other words that were written. He could make out Sereth. He could make out Fundu. So boom, here I was in South Carolina looking at my map. Here he was in Munich looking at his map. And we both came to the conclusion that this had to be the River Sereth that runs into, and of course we open up the book Dracula, and it says it right here in chapter 27, as the band of heroes are traveling up in 3 different locations, 3 different methods to cut off Count Dracula before he gets to his castle. And you know what, Michelle? We end up, when you look at the book, when you look at the notes, you look at the map, Bram Stoker had it all laid out. It brought us right to, guess what? A volcano.
Really?
An extinct volcano that happens to have the name on it, Mount Israel. You know where it is? Right near the Borgo Pass, as it should be.
So he used the volcano as a castle.
And why did he use the volcano? Because one of the books said the volcano is the home of the devil. It's the location of the fictional gods.
It's brilliant.
But to make it even more compelling, going back to the other piece of the puzzle, the other cornerstone, when J.D. Barker and I were out in Seattle, Washington, looking at the original typescript of Dracula, guess what was edited out? Edited out of Bram's writing. Somebody crossed it out, was about half a page, and it's right after Quincy Morris stabs the Count with his Bowie knife as opposed to a stake, and Harker slits his throat as opposed to cutting his head right off and putting garlic in. A volcanic eruption happens. The Count crumbles into dust, as we all know, but had this not been edited out, a massive volcanic eruption happened. Castle Dracula comes tumbling down, and sure enough, that would have been the end of the Count. But for some reason, either Bram or his editor decided to cut all that stuff out and leave a less definitive ending to the novel. So to bring this full circle, all of these little pieces that I've been talking about now for close to an hour, they all sort of come together in a logical way, I think, as Bram Stoker would have wanted them to, like as if you're reading the novel with his little bits and pieces of notes as a side puzzle game. You begin to realize what he had in mind, where he got his devil from, how he connected it to Vlad the Impaler, where is the location of his Castle Dracula, why is it on an extinct volcano, because he planned to have a volcanic eruption, and only Bram Stoker, who was as detail-oriented as he was, if he's going to have a volcanic eruption at the end of the story, even though if the editor is going to take it out, by gosh, it's going to be on an extinct volcano.
It's brilliant, really. You know, when you think about it, the representation, everything. Do you know how many people go running around Romania looking for Castle Dracula for real?
Oh yeah.
I guess you would, you know. And all in all, it's not a castle structure at all.
And that is what's the coolest thing, is it's hiding there. It's hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
Okay. But there's another twist to this, Michelle.
I
because
love twists.
I don't want to take anything away from Bran, Bran Castle.
Right.
And that is a superb tourist attraction. It's well
Oh, it is.
maintained.
It is. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. But
Yes.
there's a connection to Bram here. The exterior of the castle is what I am convinced is what Bram Stoker used for his description of the exterior of Castle Dracula in the novel. Why do I say that?
Mhm.
Well, it just happens that two of those books in the London Library had sketches of Bran Castle. Now, back in those days, it was called Castle Toursburg in
Really?
Bran, just outside of Bran. So the
Right.
name was different, and Bram didn't even need the name Bran or Toursburg, but he
No.
needed he needed something to look at when he was writing.
Mm-hmm.
And what's important about that is those are the only two sketches of any castles in any of those 28 books. It's not like there was 5 or 6 castles and Dacre just thinks, oh, it's got to be that one.
Yeah, he could take bits and pieces. He literally had one thing to go
He
on.
had one thing. And when you look at it sitting up really high on that big rock, he took a
Right.
few liberties with it. So that's the
Sure.
exterior, and he moved it as Bram moved many things in his novel.
Right.
He moved this one about 400 miles to the northeast.
Right.
But guess what? Where do you think the interior of Castle Dracula came from?
Oh, I can't wait.
It's just as bizarre, Michelle. Obviously there was no pictures of the inside
No,
of
nothing.
Bran Castle in these books. There was no pictures of the inside of any castles. But where Bram Stoker actually wrote this novel was in Cruden Bay, Scotland. And he started writing up there in 1892. He did his research in Whitby when he was there on a holiday in 1890. Came home, continued his job, did more research in the London Library, 1891, 1892. But when he went on summer holiday in 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, ended up going to Cruden Bay, Scotland for what we can tell right now, at least 14 years, maybe more.
Wow.
But we know because of the sign-in books at the hotel, at the different newspaper articles, and also, funnily enough, the Henry Irving Society has a website that kept copies and digitized them of telegrams that Henry Irving sent to Bram Stoker. And it showed that even during Bram's summer holidays, Henry Irving was sending telegrams to Bram in Cruden Bay because the telegraph office was right in the hotel he was staying at, and he was asking all kind of work-related questions. So that makes us realize that the Bram was there. The poor guy could never stop working. He was trying to write during the holiday. But guess what? The castle in the area known as Slains Castle, and the Earl of Errol was the man that owned the whole area, as they would in the days.
Right.
Bram, we don't have a record because there's no sign-in book at a private castle, but trust me on this one, I'm so positive it's not even funny, because since about 1970, the castle has been now left in ruins. And this is fairly common in these old earldoms, when the families run out of money after many generations, they strip down their castle, take all the expensive stuff and sell it for their debts. The roof, which is normally lead, of some kind of slate lead, they sell that off to cover debts. Now Slains Castle can be viewed from above, and so not only that, but you can walk in it. You don't have to even pay a ticket. There's no gate entrance.
Right.
There is a very unique octagonal room in the middle of Slains Castle, exactly in the place where there happens to be an octagonal room in Bram Stoker's fictional Castle Dracula.
Wow.
So
wow. I know
what I
Again,
do,
brilliant.
it is brilliant. What I do when I do my lectures, I have a picture on the screen of the drone shot of the octagonal room and a little arrow showing exactly the same way Bram Stoker described Jonathan Harker walking up the steps of Slane's castle, or in this case, fictional Castle Dracula, going to the door with no knocker. There's no knocker on the door at Castle Dracula, and there's no knocker at the door at Slane's. Therefore, I think when Bram went to visit, he didn't know what to do, probably pounded with his fist, a little bit nervous. Harker was too, walking through one door, and it's exactly the way he described it in Dracula. Walk through another door, into a room, no windows to the outside, lit by a single lamp. Guess what? That octagonal room was lit by a single lamp at one time. I have a photograph of that lamp.
Did you go to the castle when you were out there?
I went to the castle, but that was with this friend of mine, Mike Shepard, who's written a whole history about it. And we were giving a presentation at the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel together to all the local townsfolk, unbeknownst to us, when we put a picture up of the drone footage of the castle in the octagonal room. And we say, we understand in Dracula it said, I walked into this room, octagonal room, lit by a single lamp. A man stood up at the back of the room and said, I am Robert Hay. It's my family that used to own the castle. I own the single lamp. I still have it. It's in my home in London. So this guy was a descendant of the Earl of Errol and one of the benefactors of the tapestries and the different things, and of course the single lamp. So this is Bram personified. Yeah. He's taken a castle that he was familiar with, used the inside, a picture he was familiar with, used the outside, stuck it to a place that had this volcano, the home of the devil, and it all comes kind of full circle.
Right. It's funny because when I think of Jonathan Harker, I think a little bit of Bram is in him, just being the clerk and just the traveling and just the logic and all of that. Like I always sort of, after our first interview, and you gave us a little bit of insight into what Bram was like, right off the bat, I could see Jonathan Harker. So many little tiny synchronicities and similarities.
I totally agree. I think if you were to do this little exercise that I'm kind of feeling you've gone through, you take a little dose of Bram Stoker and that goes into Jonathan Harker. Bram had a legal background. Jonathan Harker was a lawyer. Jonathan Harker marries, Mina sort of fairly quickly, obviously in extenuating circumstances over in Europe after he's escaped from the castle. Bram kind of had a similar thing. He was asked by Henry Irving to become his theatrical manager, moved to London. He quickly sped up his marriage proceedings with Florence, grabbed her, and moved her off to London. Similar. Right. And Bram had a way of doing this too. I think Dr. Seward was a lot like his brother. Thornley Stoker, Dr. Thornley Stoker was the medical doctor helping Bram write all the medical parts, both mental and physical, in Dracula. Wow. That's Dr. Seward. And I've seen that in his notes. I know Thornley's handwriting as opposed to Bram's.
Right.
Van Helsing, I am convinced, is Arminius Vambury. That's why J.D. Barker and I used Arminius Vambury as a real character in our novel Dracul, because I've seen these guys, the dinner arrangements cards where Bram and Arminius are sitting at a dinner table together for dinner parties. So everything you've picked up on Harker and Bram is what Bram did with other people. I'm convinced that Mina is a little bit like Bram's mom, little bits and pieces, elements that he puts together.
But that's what an author does, in a sense, adds, those characteristics from those close to him. And it's so easy to develop a character, but you have to give them life. And what do? You go to maybe the traits that you respect the most about each people in your own world, in your own surroundings.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Bram was an interesting, complex guy, to have emerged from the childhood illness to having been an artist and having a big family, and being the guy that's in the family that's not necessarily a scientist and doesn't really want to be a civil servant, gravitates towards the theater, becomes a writer, and writes some interesting things. There's nonfiction books as well that he writes, as well as fiction. There's love and romance and thrillers in addition to his supernatural. But I want to make sure we have time. So there's something that I really want to pick your brain on, and that's this whole idea of second sight. What kind of time do we have left, Michelle?
We probably got about 35 minutes before I have to start playing promo stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do this, if I may. I want to read a little bit, and I want to get then your impression. We're kind of like playing a game here a little bit. But
I like games.
One of the last things, and I know that I didn't find this since during our last show, so this is kind of new. And for your listeners, I've not sent this to Michelle. She hasn't read this. She hasn't heard about it. This is something that I think I warned you that I had something pretty cool I wanted to share with you, but it's since been brought up. And in what it is an article from 1937 that a fellow called Norval Scrimmanger wrote in Dundee, Scotland. And he wrote this article for the Evening Telegram. And I've looked into this guy, and he seems to be an open-minded guy, sensitive to the paranormal, that sort of thing, back in 37. But he's talking about what originally went to meet Henry Irving, because Irving was the big star who had obviously come to do some theatrical performance in Dundee, Scotland. And Bram Stoker is always there as the manager when they're on the road or at home. And it seems that Norval Scrimmanger was more interested in Bram Stoker than Henry Irving. So I'm going to read parts of this. We can discuss it, and then I'll go on and read the rest of it. But here we go.
All right.
So Dracula is perhaps the weirdest of stories. It has been filmed. It repels yet fascinates. Remember, this is 1937. Bram died in 1912. It is a nightmare in print, yet it was, so its author told me, written while he sat in bed at dawn on summer mornings with the birds twittering in the gardens. Apparently, he said that about Cruden Bay, how wonderful the surroundings were, even though, it was a horror story. Bram Stoker was a genius and as unaffected as any amiable simpleton. He was a huge red-haired Irishman who had absorbed all the learning that Trinity College Dublin could impart, and he gave it forth in the easiest way. He was Sir Henry Irving's constant companion, his devoted friend, and a trusted advisor. And with the great actor, he came to Dundee in October 1904, when at Her Majesty's Theatre, crowded audiences thrilled, hushed, and applauded tumultuously under the impact of the supreme performances of The Bells, Waterloo, Becket, The Lion's Mail, and The Merchant of Venice. It was, of course, an honor to meet Irving, who, by the way, told me that in his early days he played in Dundee with a traveling company so poorly provided that a turnip had to be used for the skull of Hamlet.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
To be quite frank, I was more interested in meeting Bram Stoker, which I did at a lunch party given by a very learned lady who then figured prominently in social and educational movement in the city. That invitation took me to a delightful house. After 31 years, I recall exactly the sight of the comfortable dining room and the blazing fire in the wide old-fashioned grate, the gleam of silver. After the ladies had gone, the door held open a brilliant man destined to die tragically. Smoke began to rise. Bram Stoker affected a huge cigar of choice brand, but too luscious for my taste. We gathered round the fire. It happened that I sat next to the gigantic genius, and he exercised on me the irresistible spell of his eyes and voice. Those who have read Dracula or shuddered under the eerie glamour of it has seen and felt in it the picture house, will understand something of my feelings when face to face with its author. Bram Stoker was a mystic. The red-haired Irish giant was a child, sensitive of the ecclesiastical experience, which the materialist ridicules or ignores. Many people are only aware of the chair on which they sit, their dinner or their bank balance. They believe only in what they see or touch, yet their intelligence forces them to accept the fact that there are stars which they cannot see, sounds that they cannot hear, and colors outwith their perception. One often wonders if those people realize that the wireless that they listen to is demonstrating of the reality of the unseen. That is, a note of organ music sounded in Chicago will on the instant be heard at a fireside in the Carse. So the fall of the sparrow may be registered by the omnipotent medium form which the universe has derived and by which it is sustained. So this is just the first half of it, but what it's leading up to, Michelle, and just your impression, do you get the feeling that Mr. Norval Scrimmanger is one of those people that might have an interest in the occult and potentially in second sight, in that sort of thing? What's your impression so far of the way this guy describes Bram and his surroundings?
I absolutely do. I mean, you can tell he's in awe of Bram. Again, I think it comes down to the fact that Dracula itself, the story it encompasses all of that. It is one of those hidden in plain sight sort of stories because there's so much in it that if you really think about it, it's just all there. So here comes this man who's like, again, in awe of the fact that it's a genius, literary genius story. It really is. So the fact that he's talking about the things that we can't see, that you can feel, the colors that exist. I mean, you can get into vibrations, frequencies, you can get into all kinds of stuff, but he is essentially for the time explaining it quite simply.
Well,
if you know what you're looking for.
That's it. And I think this Norval knows what he's looking for because he is of this ilk. So let me continue because it gets deeper.
Okay.
So the second part is titled Second Sight. Bram Stoker started telling stories. He gave names, dates, occasions, which I daren't chronicle. His stories were all of persons and places familiar to himself. He told of what happened in a house in Edinburgh, located in a fashionable quarter, now given up to flats and nursing homes. One day, a mother went into the nursery and found her little daughter weeping bitterly. She folded the child in her arms and asked, "What is it, dear?" "Tommy is going to die," the child answered. "He won't play with me anymore." Her brother was there, apparently very happy and truculent. Yet 3 days later, he was lying dead on the spot where he had stood.
Gift of sight.
This is Bram Stoker talking with confidence that this really happened, that gift of sight. Another instance of what Bram Stoker believed confidential to be second sight. He was one of a shooting party organized by a middle-aged earl in the Western Highlands. This is the Earl of Crudenbeck. His loader was a young man. Bram said to him, "Oh, his lordship is in great form." The young Highlander shook his head. "He's not far along," he said. Bram was astonished. "What makes you say that?" he asked. And the Highlander said, "I see his sheet on his breast." Bram Stoker was impressed, but not believing. The following year, he was once again invited by the Earl. This time he was given another gillie, the loader. But he sought out the young Highlander who accompanied him the previous year. You were wrong, he said. His lordship is first class. Look at him. But the Highlander shook his head again and said solemnly, his sheet is higher. He no for long. The Earl died suddenly of an aneurysm of the heart that his doctor had not suspected. Two stories of second sight.
Yes.
So, Michelle, Bram told these stories in a luncheon full of, important people. This was not a place to BS or impress.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded to me, obviously, if I had interviewed Bram, I would have asked more. Norval obviously recorded what he heard and saw, but that was to me very interesting, and it sounded very genuine. Don't you think that Bram really believed this?
You know what? I absolutely do think so. And I think for him to feel comfortable and even speaking of such things, that he must have known that he was among people who would believe it, who would understand it, because you just don't go around speaking like that. So some things, it's like the family secret. No, you don't tell anybody, that you're a medium. You don't tell anybody. Like, back in the day, it's more acceptable now, but it wasn't so much then. And he obviously felt like he could speak freely about it amongst.
Imagine also, and this is a perspective that my wife helped me remember, Bram Stoker was a very upstanding theatrical manager of the star of the day, Henry Irving. Bram Stoker couldn't afford to be weaving tales of BS, thinking that people would say, don't go near that guy. He's a whack job. So,
or he maybe he's an actor himself.
Exactly. So,
right.
Okay, so it continues. Let me go on.
Okay.
Sitting there beside me, sometimes laying his great hand on mine, the author of Dracula spoke, as if he were in a dream, his eyes listed as with sleep. He told stories of the Western Highlands, of so-called apparitions seen by 2 and even 3 persons simultaneously. I was a receptive listener. I had experience of second sight, of the substantiality of what materialists describe as apparitions. So now we know Norval does have an appreciation for this.
Yes, yes.
What is life but a dream, he says. Let materialists look at stark, silent something that was someone they knew, and what have they to say about reality? When they themselves lie stiff and voiceless, where will their bank balance be, save in the lists of the estates?
A little bit of insight there. You can't take it with you.
Exactly.
I think it was really well done. It goes back into the movement, the whole. But this would have been, I think, expected of Bram, being the author of Dracula, to be whimsical like that.
Let me now, just like I've been doing with those pieces of the puzzle of Dracula, I'll throw a couple more pieces at you and your listeners. Bram Stoker wrote a story called The Mystery of the Sea, and he set it in Cruden Bay, Scotland.
Okay.
The first 2 chapters were released early, called The Seer. And it is so autobiographical, it's not funny.
Wow.
Now, to all of your listeners, I'm not trying to sell books. You can get all these books for free because they're in public domain on bramstoker.org. I sell books at bramstoker.com, bramstokerestate.com, but go to bramstoker.org and you can get all of Bram's books, because a professor, and I forget his name now, McAuliffe, I forget his first name, has done a great service to people who like Bram's writing. Everything is PDFs, and you can get it for free. Check out The Seer, and you will read as Michelle and I are talking right now, somebody very receptive to Second Sight, and it's Archibald Hunter, which is just like Bram Stoker putting himself into this story, and he's arrived at Cruden Bay as Hunter has. It's Bram Stoker arriving there and meeting a person in that town. In the story, her name is Gormala. In real life, we don't know her name, but this is close to the Western Highlands of Scotland that is referenced, as Bram did in this article. And so there is a lady with second sight. So the whole story, the mystery of the sea, I love it so much. It is a little verbose. My son, who is a PhD candidate in English literature, within the next year, we're going to be abridging that story. So we cut out some of the extras. It is a really good story. It involves the supernatural, a little bit like Dracula. It involves second sight, but also mystery and so on. That's the first little piece of the puzzle. The second one is in Bram's library that his wife sold off after Bram died. There's a number of books. They didn't go for a lot of money. But a friend of mine, John Edgar Browning, who's a professor in Atlanta in the Savannah College of Art and Design, he teaches English there. He's done tremendous research into my Uncle Bram, and he's been able to post all the books that were in Bram's library. So, Michelle, that's in addition, that's his personal library, in addition to the books at the London Library. So if you look at that in entirety, you can see Sotheby's list of books auctioned off. And one of them is a special book because it is a book about second sight in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. And it is the only book that Bram Stoker ever did a professional written review for. And it showed up in a newspaper, thanks to John Browning's digging, in New Zealand.
Wow,
so
long way from home.
Yeah, who knows why? But what it does, and maybe they've got people interested in second sight, sort of obscure places. What it shows is that Bram Stoker certainly respected the author, McCrae, in his writing of this book on second sight. In other words, he didn't diss the whole thing. It was, there may be something to this. This is very interesting. There are some accounts of people taking advantage, but there's other really interesting and potential true things that people really do have second sight. So those are little pieces, along with the mystery of the sea, the seer, and this article in Dundee, that sort of give a perspective of Bram and what maybe he was thinking, what his terms of references were for such things as second sight. So that's my info. Continue with your thoughts, because you're the expert here. Wondering what you think about it.
Expert's strong word, but no, you know what? I feel that with Bram, again, he lived in a time where there was a great curiosity. England is always, like the UK itself, has always been ahead of its time. It still is, with research into parapsychology and spiritualism and alchemy, all of that. I mean, alchemy itself is very, very old study, and people are still just so enthralled with it. But I think with Bram, he was well respected. He made a name for himself with Dracula. It sounds to me like he could have made a name for himself with many of his books. He was just really a brilliant man. I think Dracula was just the one thing that took people away. He was able to bring them someplace entirely different. It's not like anybody could just travel that easily back then. So you did so by losing yourself in a book, and he found that way. I also think with being a Mason that he had access to information. I think it can be a very misunderstood. They look at, a secret society. Well, I think it's far beyond that, because it's all about being keepers of knowledge. And being keepers of knowledge, we have to understand that you have to be a Mason and a certain degree of Mason to be given bits of certain pieces of knowledge, it has to be pretty impressive. And I think in his writings, he gave little bits and pieces of that.
Yeah. There's a saying, I believe it's right, as above is below, something like that.
Yes, as above is below.
Yeah.
Yes.
That, as I look at Dracula and I look at, and I've now been to Cruden Bay, Scotland. I was actually there for the 120th anniversary of Dracula.
Ooh, it's something else to talk about.
Yeah,
Yes.
It was cool. It's another destination. It's another effort that I'm making as a family member to create the, sort of contribute to the literary legacy of Bram.
Yes.
Places to go besides, obviously, Dublin and London are no-brainers. That's where he was born and raised. That's where he worked. But
Yes.
Whitby, England, where he went for one holiday and set 3 chapters there. But further up the coast, north of Aberdeen, is a town called Cruden Bay, Scotland, that I can be very proud to say, Michelle, there is a hotel that it's the same hotel Bram stayed at. It's very quaint. It's exactly the same exterior and mostly the same interior. It now has a lovely large plaque on the outside that is not just a word plaque, it's image that has a picture of Bram and a map of the area and little red dots that coincide to text, as well as a Q code to the website that show all the places where Bram stayed, where he was known to actually sit and write his stories, where he used specific places in either Dracula, Mystery of the Sea, or the Water's Mouth, which stands for the Water's Mouth, or even the Lair of the White Worm. So this place, this lovely little fishing village is pretty much unchanged since the day Bram was there. And I say that with all due respect.
Time stands still. No, I love it.
Yeah, it does in a way. But it had a feeling to me that I think Bram had, as Mike Shepard, my buddy and co-author, said, Bram got off the train in Peterhead and walked south with a map in his hand that had the geological survey of the area. Bram was enamored, not so funnily enough, when we talk about the London Library and the books he looked about volcanoes, with what was under the ocean. And what you see when you get to Cruden Bay is this 2-mile beach, which at high tide is a lovely sandy beach you think is Florida or South Carolina or somewhere.
Right.
But at low tide, you see all the rocks, you see the mysteries underneath the sea.
Yes.
Spanish galleons from the Spanish Armada had wrecked there because of the hurricane. They found bones, they found money, they found cannons. Many fishing ships have wrecked on these rocks, and the souls of the dead are resting there, which Bram recognizes in his books. And so I believe Bram was guided there in a way because of his interest in the geology and the massive upheavals of the underworld, the rocks, a million years ago. And he recognized this in the Mystery of the Sea because they have these very interesting red granite rocks, pinkish rocks that have rise up out of the ocean. But the other half of the bay, which is just half a mile away, is this rock called gneiss, like Nice, gneiss, and it's a black rock. So they have met there, these plates met there, and a massive eruption happened at some point. Well, you and I know, if there's somebody interested in the supernatural, in Mother Earth, also in the whole concept of pantheism, which we chatted about in our last show, all the world is basically ruled by the Mother Earth, and all religions are okay, but they're not the all-powerful things. That this would have been the bona fide sort of attraction to Bram, is the connection to the planet and the earth and the under earth. So, my gosh, another reason we got to go there, Michelle, to show you all this stuff. And
Oh
your
my
listeners
gosh,
need
you
to
never
go.
get me out of the bay waiting for low tide.
It is so cool. It
Yes.
really is eerie. He mentions in this Mystery of the Sea, and it's powerful, that he witnesses a ghost walk from the scars, which is the reef.
Yeah.
Thousands of souls come out of the ocean searching for a place to rest at peace, and there just happens to be a famous well on the golf course where in real days it's really there. People go for the healing waters. Well, what Bram did in his story was give that as a place for these poor souls that were not at rest, and they all went down into the well to seek redemption and a place to rest out their ghostly remains to rest in peace.
Right.
So,
but yet it's a place of healing.
Exactly.
So it's got that double representation, a place
Healing
to
of
go
the soul,
to
heal. Healing the mortal, but also
Yes.
the immortal. Yeah.
Yes. He definitely had a way with words, but he also, even just like what he did with the volcano, there's just double meanings to everything that you could really, if you really look at it, that you could take, two different ways. And I mean, always in a good way. But again, I keep going back to that hidden knowledge that he had and wasn't maybe allowed to speak of, because to be part of a, again, I always laugh. I won't laugh. I take it back. The secret society thing. But these, because I know, and again, I know people who belong to many different ones. I own collections from some of these places, and the knowledge that is hidden, that all these great minds, look at Benjamin Franklin, you get Isaac Newton, you get these really big, powerful men within their own circles, and they are all part of this, and they've got all of this hidden knowledge. And you have someone like Bram who was able to take it. Who knows what was going on in his head behind, because you couldn't come out and just say blah, because we'd all be like, what? What was that? But I think in a way it drove him, because it was always turning, and it was just able to find ways, maybe through images, or maybe, just through places where he was giving you little tidbits, because it's all esoteric, really.
I've had this discussion with other people, and somebody came up with, he said, Bram, and I love this term, wove into the fabric of Dracula.
Yes.
Many of these thoughts and beliefs that maybe he just was not able to speak of in public because of his standing as a theater manager. He was trying so hard to make sure that people would come to the Lyceum Theater, and it would be a good time. You get good value for your money. There wouldn't be raucous behavior like there used to be in theaters. You wouldn't have drunk actors on stage. All this. So he needed to be upstanding.
Yes.
Yet he had all these ideas in his mind. He read all these books. He absorbed this stuff. He had these incredible interests. And when you look at some of his other stories, about Egyptology and supernatural in Egypt and mummies, there's all this going on. Yet they had to be kind of, as you said, sort of just entered into the story subversively to get people to think about it, rather than just sit down and say, I believe X, Y, and Z, or I believe this. And then
it's a hidden in plain sight thing.
For criticism, isn't he? Yeah.
Well, he is. And I think once Dracula, he made a name for himself with Dracula, because that was the book that just went crazy. Now, all of a sudden, you're a public figure. one thing I've learned about being a public figure, as I'm sure you've learned, is you have to somewhat govern yourself accordingly, even when you don't want to.
Yeah.
You get that sometimes there's that one thing nagging at you or that one person you'd like to just go, but you always have to govern yourself accordingly. And I think that made him a person of standing also. So you want to be that. No, I'm respectful. I wrote this book. I'm a bit of a literary celebrity, because it took off so much more after his passing. I wonder if he ever imagined that 125 years later, it is just as amazing to the world as it ever was.
That's a great question, and
like I shiver really when I say it.
No, you do. You think, what would he started something? Would he have any idea? And in a way, it's sad. He protected the dramatic rights by having a stage reading. His wife was able to capitalize on that. She was able to get Hamilton Dean and Joel Balderston to create a stage play. Bela Lugosi, Raymond Huntley. It becomes a big deal. In 1931, it becomes a movie. She fights off the Nosferatu copyright infringement. For the next 25 years or so, she fights, but she reaps the benefits of it as well. And then the modernization happens, and we have something called popular culture, and Dracula is everywhere. The way I look at it is in a funny kind of way. Bram Stoker was the theater manager. And when you think of long runs that things like Cats, Les Miserables have had,
it's a classic.
Nobody has had 125 of Dracula yet.
It's true.
So
no, it's true.
I think Bram is sitting up there and his spirit is there.
Going,
and as we're chatting about it, part of his spirit is with us as we're trying to figure it out. And he's probably giggling a little bit, saying, well,
I left clues.
I left some, it's about time somebody found some of this stuff,
Exactly. Oh, exactly. I think it's fantastic. It's a legacy that will go on for another 125 years, because this isn't something that will ever go away. Just walk through any real part of Romania. Brian, I visited so many parts. I went from one end of the country to the other, and there wasn't one place where I wasn't finding not just Vlad stuff, but Dracula stuff.
Yeah.
Memorabilia. It's just, Dracula wine. I had about 6 bottles of different types of Dracula wine. It's like, yes, but it's leaving its mark still. And I can't see that ever really going away. It's the first book I ever read, and I was hooked from that point on. I'm pretty sure I was like 12 when I read Dracula.
Well, that stands to reason that what you've grown up to be is a person severely affected by reading Dracula at the age
I
of
know.
12, getting
Thank
into
you, Bram
the
Stoker. I know.
outer realm and supernatural paranormal
Exactly.
investigation.
Thank you for making me that much more exceptional just by writing this amazing book.
Absolutely.
But I also have like a first edition. I'll have to check.
Cool.
I'll have to check which one. Yeah, it's not yellow though. It's crazy. So I'm wondering if it's just a different run or something. Or maybe it used to be yellow. It's just so old.
It might have been, or maybe it's they actually have first editions in the colonies. They have a first edition American. They got other first editions. So
I'll take a picture.
Take a picture. Take a picture of the front page, but also open it up and take a picture of the one that maybe be the publisher and all that. Because I've got quite a collection, but I also know people. I know people.
I know people
that there's books about that, so I can help you figure it out.
I love it. I love it. It's in the safe.
Before you got to go and do your commercial stuff, we just need to, try to give a plug that someday you and I are going to take people on a trip. And, I'm really excited to get back to Transylvania. It's a lovely country. It's very safe when the Russians aren't screwing up.
I was there 9 years ago. It was my last time.
So we got to go back and got to go up to the mountains and take people to this actual volcano. It's not hard to get to once now that I know it's easy. But also these trips to Cruden Bay, Scotland and Whitby. I'm really excited that this year the Bram Stoker Festival is revived back in Dublin. So I'm going back as a guest and putting on my lectures there. That's That's
Yes.
Michelle. I always have to figure out early in the year, and this is a little bit late for it, but where I'm
Yes.
going to be in Halloween weekend, and that's where I'm going to be in Dublin, Ireland, at the Bram
Oh,
Stoker Festival. So
that's spectacular. That's
yeah,
perfect
looking forward
timing.
to that. Absolutely.
I love
Yeah.
it. I love it. So people can find all of this information if they want to join you. If there's merchandise they want to buy, books they want to buy, to promote how they can get a hold of you.
Well, you've had the little ticker going below here.
Sure have.
I appreciate that. BramStokerEstate.com is where my wife and I run this for the whole family, and we've got all the books that I've written, co-authored, merchandise, and so on.
Thunder.
I actually got hacked on Facebook a couple of months ago, so
I know.
I'm
But
back.
where'd you go?
Yeah, it was one of these where I got hacked and I got shut down because whoever hacked me posted inappropriate stuff. But I'm back on as Dacre Stoker author. So go to Dacre Stoker author, friend me. I used to have 5,000. I couldn't take anybody else, but now I'm back down to 2,500. So join me there. That's where I post all the stuff about appearances when I'm coming to the West Coast, when I'm going to Chicago, which is in later in the month. I'm going to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. Are you going to be at Michigan Paracon this year? Oh, you just froze on me. So if I don't know if you can hear me or Michelle, but Michigan Paracon in August. So my Facebook page tells all about that. And then dacrestoker.com is my website with information on what my books and so on. So somehow it looks like we have frozen StreamYard. We'll see what happens if Michelle comes back. Well, I'm still here, folks. I'm not sure if Michelle is, and I'm not even sure if I'm live, but this has been absolutely wonderful chatting with you guys tonight. I think I've probably spoken more than I have in a long time. It's always fun having Michelle let me speak as much as I want all about Bram Stoker Dracula. So again, thank you to the Outer Realm. I am Dacre Stoker, great grandnephew of Bram Stoker. I can be found at Facebook page for Dacre Stoker author or bramstokerestate.com. And that's me signing off. Y'all take care. Bye now.
Aren't you on about Crazy Woman?
Oh my God, it was huge. Big bam. And all of a sudden everything cut out. I have backup, but the internet reset itself and that was the end of the show. Can you
Well,
hear
that's
the
weird because
thunder?
it should have left him. He should have stayed up there. See, StreamYard's weird. It's supposed to stay as long as somebody's in it. It's supposed to stay.
Yeah, it doesn't. It
'Cause
cut out.
y'all have
complete-
lost me a couple of times and stayed on long. When I started the show as a producer, y'all have lost me a couple of times and stayed on. That's why I said it's kind of weird. It's also kind of weird, like why Nicole's always got to get a code before every show. Nobody else in the network does.